Hello, I'm Peter Chern from the Harbours Medical Practice, and we're back talking about mental health. The first video was really about how to act differently to improve your mental health. Well, this one is some ways of thinking a little bit differently, perhaps that might spur you into action. But I'm a big believer that it's actions, then thoughts, and then feelings. But these are certainly some ideas that have helped me personally, and again have helped patients. So buckle up, it might get a little bit woo-woo. Well, I've run out to maybe my favourite place in the world, actually. It's where I'd like my ashes to be scattered, to try and share some of the wisdom of a beautiful human being called Mo Gawdat. Now, Mo has rededicated his life to sharing his wisdom about happiness. He was the chief operating officer for Google X, a hugely successful businessman. He had it all, tons of money, cars in the garage, a beautiful wife, and was profoundly depressed. And he then lost his son in tragic circumstances. And what he really discovered was that happiness is found in the gap between our expectations and our experiences. You know, put simply, when our expectations are too high, whether it's for our work, whether it's for the weekend, whether it's for holidays, it's very difficult to match those expectations. And when we lower our expectations and try and find just contentment in our lives, it's much easier to exceed those expectations and find really true happiness, or maybe better described as contentment. There's evidence that a year after a spinal cord injury, people are just as content as if they'd won the lottery. And Mo makes the point that how we respond to events really comes down to a choice, to choose to try and respond positively. Now that's incredibly difficult, but I take great comfort from Mo's experience that if he can find some contentment after the loss of his son, well, hopefully we all can. Well, unfortunately, sometimes we need to put in the work. Life doesn't come with a manual, and sometimes we can be guilty of just hoping that things are going to get better by themselves. But there's an old adage that the brain that got yourself into this mess isn't the one that's going to get you out of it. So spending some time reading the thoughts of others who've been there before can be really so helpful. Well, Dan Buettner has made it his life's work to study the areas in the world where people have an unusually long life expectancy and content lives. He calls them the blue zones. And maybe it just boils down to 4 rules. We just need something to do, something to give, something to love, and something to look forward to. That doesn't sound so hard. Well, there's a saying that you cannot change the wind, but you can adjust the set of your sails. So what do you do when it feels like life is blowing you in the wrong direction? Well, the thing about sailing is that you can always make progress towards your goal, even into the wind. I've heard that saying attributed to Aristotle and to Dolly Parton. Those guys knew what they were talking about. Well, there had to be something about running. And there's an old marathon running mantra that says that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And life's an awful lot like that. Well, we're back in the cold water to try and explore how important it is to embrace the difficulties and challenges in our lives. You know, really no growth comes when life is going well and according to plan. But when we're faced with challenges and adversity, well, that's when we learn about ourselves, and that's when we can grow as people. Well, it's a really unfortunate truth that the people that annoy you the most, that criticize you the most, that make you feel more angry and irritated than anyone else, are probably those that you're going to learn most from. Understanding that has really helped me respond to those situations in a really positive way. Because if I'm honest, there's often more than a kernel of truth in what they have to say. Well, we know that a series of really small changes can add up to make a really big difference. But sometimes even those small changes can feel really difficult to achieve. As doctors, we often fall into the trap of focusing on the motivation to make a change. For example, with alcohol, well, if you stop drinking, then it's actually going to be really helpful for your mental health because it's a depressant. The problem is that our motivation comes in waves. So on New Year's Day, when your motivation is high, well, it's going to be really easy to avoid having that drink. But when your motivation's in a trough on a Friday night after a busy week at work, that's not going to be good enough. And it's going to be very hard to resist having a drink. What's much more effective, as BJ Fogg describes, is focusing on making that change as easy as possible. So for alcohol, well, don't have any alcohol in the house. Buy alcohol-free drinks. And don't go out and put yourself into environments where it's going to be very difficult to resist drinking. 4,000 weeks, that's all we've got. According to Oliver Burkeman, it's the average lifespan. Seems a really short time, doesn't it? So we've really got to live in the full knowledge that we haven't got very much time. And your great-grandchildren won't even know your name. So there's only two rules. Number one, don't sweat the small stuff. And number two, it's all small stuff. Harry, what's your great-granddad's name?
Tony.
It's not Tony. Well, Eleanor Roosevelt said that comparison was the thief of joy. We've got to be so careful about following the highlights reel of somebody else's life on social media. If you're going to leave a comment, well, be nice. Try and make people feel good. Be a radiator and not a mood hoover. As Joe Rogan says, do you think Michael Jordan leaves YouTube comments? Well, we're at work, it's a Monday morning. And if you could keep a secret, I'm quite enjoying myself. But it's not the story that I normally tell myself. I really look forward to the weekends and I look forward to holidays. That's when I'm going to be really happy. But the truth is that sometimes my expectations for those weekends and holidays are probably a little bit too high. So critically looking at your life and trying to tell yourself a more honest story about what actually makes you most content can help you feel better in your daily life. I better get back to it. Well, sometimes you need to get up high for a new perspective on your life. Looking back or down on events and seeing whether things are really as bad as they seem. I like to think of it as taking a hot air balloon up for a different perspective, or maybe being on the top of a Monroe and seeing the glorious view. Well, thanks very much for watching. There's an old Chinese proverb that says that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the second best time is now. So if you're feeling down, maybe the most important thing is just to try something, to try and think differently about how you're feeling. And we're not perfect. So the worst thing you can do is feel bad about how you're feeling. I'm going to see if Michael Jordan's left a comment. Thanks for watching.